The idea of carrying an aircraft on board a submarine for spotting purposes first occurred to the Royal Navy before the First World War. In great secrecy, a young Navy lieutenant called Charles Burney worked with the British and Colonial Aeroplane Company to develop three hydroplanes, creatively called X1, X2, and X3. One of these was collapsible, so it could potentially be stored aboard a submarine. As far as I can tell, none of these aircraft was ever actually taken aboard a submarine, but in 1916, a second iteration of the concept began. Two Sopwith Schneider seaplanes went out on the E-class submarine E-22 for experiments, but the capability was never operationalized. Then in the 1920s, the construction of larger submarines and more sophisticated aircraft led to renewed interest in the concept in all of the major naval powers. In the Royal Navy, it led to Specification 1624, that called for a two-seat naval reconnaissance seaplane that could be packed away for storage on board the boat. In response, Harold Bolus at the Parnell Company designed the Peto. It was a necessarily small aircraft with short, folding biplane wings and built around a 135 horsepower Bristol Lucifer 4 three-cylinder radial engine, driving a two-bladed wooden propeller. Unusually, the hand-starting handle for the engine was in the observer's cockpit. One of his first tasks when boarding the aircraft was therefore to get the thing started. The wings were swept back, staggered, and of uneven span, giving the Peto quite a unique appearance. Adding to this uniqueness was the top wing's position, which was level with the eye line of the pilot and observer to give them the maximum visibility while still retaining a biplane layout. Control was via full-span ailerons on the upper main plane. 6 different aerofoil configurations were tried out on the first two Peto prototypes over their test careers, which rather complicates identification. Parnell wasn't sure what shape would give the required 110-mile-an-hour performance, and they used trial and error to find out. The wings had spars, ribs, and drag struts made of spruce, internally braced with tie rods and externally by stainless steel struts. The center wing section was supported and braced to the fuselage with tubular steel struts. That fuselage was also made of spruce longerons, braced with spruce and stainless steel struts. The structure was covered with removable aluminium panels forward of the pilot's cockpit and fabric aft of it. The engine was attached to the fuselage using stainless steel tubes. Its cowling was easy to remove for storage. 14.5 mighty imperial gallons of fuel was located beneath the wing center section. There wasn't a pump, so the fuel was gravity fed into the engine. The fin was aluminium, the horizontal tail was wood framed and fabric covered. It rested on the top of the fuselage forward of the fin. There was a fair bit of stainless steel in the structure in an attempt to resist the effects of corrosion from seawater. Stainless was costly, but Parnell's view was that it would reduce maintenance and therefore overall cost of ownership should fall. The seaplane floats were Duralmin. They had V-shaped bottoms and water rudders. Sanders Row also supplied an alternate set made of mahogany plywood, and a set of wheels was supplied to the Navy for use on land. These were borrowed from the rather larger Parnell Pike reconnaissance aircraft. All up, it weighed a flyweight 1,300 pounds empty and a shade over 2,000 pounds fully loaded. It was 22.5 feet long with a wingspan of 28 feet and 5 inches. With the wings folded, the span was just 8 feet. The prototypes flew in the summer of 1926, and they were judged to have good handling in the air and on the water. The main issue was the service ceiling, which was only 9,500 feet rather than the desired 11,000. The Royal Navy's chosen submarine aircraft carrier was the M2, a large boat that had been built during the First World War. M2 and its sisters, the creatively named M1 and M3, were intended for shore bombardment and were thus armed with a 12-inch gun forward of the island. M1 sank as a result of a collision on November 12, 1925. M3 was converted into a mine layer. That left M2. She was taken in hand during 1925 and returned in 1927, with a large aircraft hangar in place of the 12-inch gun and its handling facilities. The hangar was rounded on top, and it had a door measuring 9 feet and 3 inches by 8 foot 9. 200 voluminous imperial gallons of petrol were held in a tank so that the aircraft could keep operating for an extended cruise. A crane allowed the Peto to be craned out onto the water, but the usual launch method was a compressed air or cordite powered catapult that could launch an aircraft as heavy as 7,000 pounds. The catapult could propel such an aircraft to 45 miles an hour in just 34 feet, subjecting it to 2.5 G in the process. The Peto was stored in the hangar with its wings folded, but already resting on a trolley, itself on a set of rails. To launch the aircraft, the hangar door was lowered to make a platform, over which a further set of rails were quickly laid to connect the aircraft in the hangar to the catapult rail. The Peto was then pushed forward until it was locked onto the catapult dolly, at which point the wings were folded out and also locked. The observer cranked the engine, the pilot got the motor running at maximum revs, then raised his hand. From his vantage point on the raised conning tower, another modification during conversion, M2's captain then signaled to a waiting seaman that he could release the lever that operated the catapult. The Peto then shot forward, becoming airborne in seconds. The first people to try it were Lieutenants Bias and Cayley Peach. Although dangerous, there were benefits to being submarine aviators. The men received double pay, one set for being airmen and the other for being submariners. The first Peto prototype, N1A1, went to sea in 1928 and served a number of cruises until it was badly damaged in 1930 off Gibraltar, when it alighted too heavily and was damaged. Unceremoniously gathered up by a harbour crane, it was painstakingly rebuilt as the N255 and went back to sea. The second prototype, N182, took up flying duties for a time. Then, on Sunday the 29th of June 1930, it took off from M2 near Ryde, heading for the Naval Cooperation School at Lyon-Solent. As it flew over Stokes Bay on approach to Lee, it passed over a long row of beach huts. As it did, the engine decided to stall, and the pilot had to force land immediately. The Peto came down on top of the huts, demolishing half a dozen of them before coming to rest in the wreckage. Apparently, one of the huts was occupied by a man changing for a swim. He escaped just in time, but sadly for him, without his clothes. Perhaps out of sheer embarrassment, N182 was retired once it was repaired after this incident. So it was the rebuilt N255 that was aboard M2 when it was the submarine's turn to suffer a serious mishap. On the morning of January the 26th, 1932, M2 failed to resurface after a routine dive off Portland Harbour. The submarine was discovered in 108 feet of water on February the 3rd. All 7 officers, 51 seamen, and 2 RAF leading aircraftsmen had perished. The divers removed the Peto from the hangar and it was retrieved to the surface despite strong currents that threatened to tangle it in the wreckage. It was returned to Portland Harbour. On inspection, the fuselage was found to be rather battered and the Fairy Reed propeller was bent out of shape. It was decided that it was uneconomical to repair the aircraft, and in any event, it proved impossible to bring M2 to the surface. This was the end of the Royal Navy's experiment with submarine-launched spotters. The strategic reality was that its submarines were unlikely to operate in bodies of water sufficiently large to require such capability, and the cost of the installation in terms of speed, range, the supplies that could be carried, and the underwater noise generated just weren't worth the benefits. The second Peto was sold to one FCH Allen, who later entered his intention to register it as a civil aircraft. But the work was never completed, and the aircraft was last seen at Ford Aerodrome in Sussex in 1934 or 35. Who knows, maybe one day an abandoned warehouse somewhere in southeast England will be cracked open and N182 rediscovered. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.